You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side, yeah.
I don't want those sounds.
We chased our pleasures here, dug our treasures there. But can you still recall the time we cried? Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side.
Break on through. All right. Well, go ahead and grab your seat. Man, the 11 a.m. service, just a bunch of talkers. I'm Dave, one of the pastors here. Thanks for being here on Easter Sunday for our second service. Hey, does anybody know who that music was that was just playing? And you're not allowed to answer if you're over the age of 30. Okay, so if you're anybody under the age of 30 know who that is, call it out if you know. Not the Rolling Stones. Okay, now if you're between 30 and 40, you can reply. The Doors. That's the Doors. Okay, so you failed test number 1. Okay. That's all right. There'll be other tests today. We'll have lots of opportunities for bonus points. But that is the Break On Through to the Other Side by Jim Morrison and The Doors. American rock and roll at its best. Now, you say, well, why would you play such a song to start an Easter service? Well, because for some reason or another, God put it on my heart to do an entire sermon on doors. Like, I'm not even joking. You'll see. The entire service is just about doors. The most famous doors in history, we'll be talking about those doors. So I thought let's start off with just a little bit of door trivia, okay? And here's how this is going to work. I'm going to put up a picture, and you're going to tell me if you know of this famous door, okay? So I just played The Doors. Now let's do some real doors, okay? Let's put up that first picture. Anybody know about that door? Yeah. Bag Ends, yeah. The Shire, Hobbits, Bilbo. Okay, that's a very famous door. Let's put up the next one. Let's see if you can get this one. You would have thought Sherlock Holmes, but no. Look at the number. That's right, somebody said it. You know who they call number 10? The British Prime Minister lives in residence number 10 right here. Okay, so that is, if you don't know who the Prime Minister is, the equivalent to the English president. Okay, what about this one? This is for, I'll give you a hint. This is for all my Scandinavian relatives and friends, okay, that are here. That is a Viking door, but do you know what Viking door? Has anyone seen this in real life? Okay, this is Stave Church in Borgund, Norway. Borgund, Norway, built 1180 out of fir wood. Okay, okay, lots of cool stuff. It's like Christian and Viking symbols all carved into that wood. Pretty cool. Okay, so how about this one? You guys got this one. What's that? No, not Trump Tower. Chrysler Building, yeah, way to go. New York, stand up. Okay, Chrysler Building. That's there in Manhattan, New York City. Okay, let's see what this next one is. That's right. Narnia, that's right. From The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the first book of the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. That is Lucy and the wardrobe that leads to the. Okay, what about this next one? Yeah, that's like your front door, yeah. Chicago, anybody from Chicago? As a hint? Not Sears Tower. This is the famous peacock doors at the Palmer House. The Palmer House in Chicago. This is actually designed and built by Louise Comfort Tiffany. Tiffany and Co. Yeah, so that is the famous bronze peacocks in Chicago. I think we have people that say nobody got that. Okay. How about this next one? This is real. This is not it is in England, not Oxford. It's St. Edward's Church. And it was built in the 1200s. It's rumored to have inspired J.R.R. Tolkien with the writing of the Fellowship of the Ring. What the streets have no name, where the streets have no name, we're still building them, burning them down. Good. Okay, how about this next one? And when I go there, guess the city you get. It's all I can do. We got the city. Somebody just called out Asia. And I was like, you're going to have to be more specific. Slightly more specific. And our love turns to rust. Tokyo. This is actually in Tokyo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but it's Yuno Toshogu Shrine in Tokyo. I'll show you a place. Okay, how about these doors? Okay, now, for those of you who are regulars here at Sideris, hopefully you'll get this one. Okay, show this last one. You know it? Yeah. That's the Home Alone house. That's Kevin McAllister lives there. And we love Home Alone here at Sideris. We have a little slogan, no Kevins. We don't want anybody left without a home. Okay, so that's my quiz. You did not so good, but that's okay. So many doors, right? Like there's so many doors in our world, so many places to go, so many things to see, so many doors to walk through. Walk through doors every day, just not even thinking about who made this door. Could it fall on me? So doors are everywhere, right? And this morning I want to talk about actually these are all famous doors. These are some of the most famous doors in all the world, but there is a door that's actually more famous and more important. It's a door that we don't even have a photo of. Well, you say, how could it be the most famous door if there's not even a photo of it? You can't go visit it. Like, how is it still so famous? Well, that's because the person that made the door famous is even more famous than the door. And for some reason, the things that he stands near to get glory. This is a door made famous because this person spent 48 hours behind this door. Just 48 hours. And it's still to this day the most famous door in the world. Did you know this morning, 2 billion plus people are talking about this door? And this person spent 48 hours near it. Wow, that's incredible, isn't it? Now, if it's so famous, why don't we know where it is? Why don't we have a photo of it? Why can't you go visit it? Well, that's because once this person left the door, his friends, those who thought he was important, they forgot where it was. How could that happen? Well, because he is so much more important than the door. And so they just lost track of it because the thing that was most valuable, that was most weighty, was actually somewhere else. And so let me show you a picture of this door. I found a similar door. It's not the door, but it's similar to the door that I'm talking about. This is what it looks like. There's the door. 2,000 or 2 billion people are talking about that door today. That's incredible. This is the door, or a door like this, to the tomb of Jesus Christ. A carpenter who lived 2,000 years ago that apparently was inside of that door, or a door like that, for a little over 48 hours. And still today, 2,000 years later, we're talking about that door. This door is the most talked about door in human history. Why? Why? Well, it's because Jesus went into that door, a dead man, and came out alive. That's why people talk about this door. So I thought, well, since God said do a whole sermon about doors, I thought I'd tell you a few facts about this door. You might not know about this door. So I have another picture here that'll show you. You see how that stone rolls away? Now look, this is what it would look like on the inside of that door. And this is going to be important because you're going to see, maybe you've heard the accounts of Jesus' resurrection before. And I'm going to show you how true to the actual history it is. And you're going to say like, man, those writers, they were good. No, they weren't good. They were just saying what they saw. And so if you looked into his tomb, this is what it would look like. It's actually quite a short door. The door is the main door is only probably like this high. So you'd have to stoop underneath it to see in. This is what archaeologists have found. They found several tombs from the same time period, and this is what they look like. You see the giant stone that would roll in front of the door, but then inside the door, you see that chamber, right? Now, you see where the linen is, that is where they suspect Jesus was probably laying. Now, what's interesting is this is actually like the front porch to the whole burial tomb. But what archaeologists found in all the other tombs that they found is actually those that were brand new tombs would have dug out the first chamber first, but then over time they would have added more and more chambers to it. So had Jesus, say, gone into a fully or an old tomb, the tomb would have had multiple chambers and his body wouldn't have been right in the entrance chamber. It would have been put in some other chamber. But because this was a new tomb and the person for whom the tomb was meant had not yet died, there was just one chamber. That's why when we hear about the accounts of his disciples, and that included Mary Magdalene and the other women, and that included John and Peter, when they come, they can actually see Jesus just by stooping down and looking inside. They could see where the linens that he was wrapped in were. So let me read that to you. Matthew 27, 57 to 60 says this. When it was evening, a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph came. So Jesus died on Friday. It was evening, and they had to get his body down and begin the burial process before the Sabbath of Saturday began. And there was a rich man. The only people that had tombs like this were rich. But a rich man had become a disciple of Jesus. His name was Joseph. He was from Arimathea. And he said, you know what, I'll take his body. Even though his world had been crushed, he thought Jesus was the Messiah. He thought he was the one that would come and free the people from the yoke of Rome. He thought for sure, but he had so much respect and honor for Jesus. Even though Jesus had died and that dream was over, he said, I'll take the body and I'll bury him in my tomb, the tomb that I'd been preparing. And look what it says. So then Joseph of Arimathea approached Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Then Pilate ordered that it be released. So Joseph took the body, wrapped it in clean, fine linen, and placed it in his new tomb. That was an interesting detail. Now, 2,000 years later, all the archaeology, we can see how important that detail is. It was a new tomb. It had just been carved out. They'd only finished the first chamber. That's why Jesus' body was visible just by coming in the front entrance. So then he left, Joseph left, and after rolling a great stone against the entrance of the tomb. Now, archaeologists have found a few of these stones. They've dug them up, and super fascinating. How big were these stones? They're probably like 4.5 feet in diameter, and they're probably about like a foot thick. And they probably would have weighed 600, 700 pounds. You say, well, how much is that? That's like the weight of a grizzly bear or a medium-sized grand piano. Okay. So it's pretty heavy. That's why when the women go to the tomb, they say, well, how are we going to move the tomb to finish the burial preparation that we couldn't quite finish on Friday? How are we going to do that? We're going to have to move a grizzly bear. Of course, they come to the tomb and the stone is already rolled away. The door is already open. Jesus' body is no longer there. So this is what this door is like. It's made of rock. It's not super attractive. There's no gold on it. There's nothing special about it, except that the person that was on the inside of the door is the most important person that ever lived. Okay. So as I started thinking about doors all week, I said, well, what do you want me to say about doors? You know, a passage that we had looked at last week popped to mind. And we're studying through the book of Joshua, and we'd love to have you come back as we jump back in. We walk through books of the Bible. Joshua's the 6th book of the Bible, right after the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books written by Moses. And then Joshua is the heir apparent to Moses, and he takes the people of Israel after Moses dies and takes them into the promised land. And so we're in chapter 7, and we just finished, and we heard a really brutal story about a man named Achan and his family. And Achan commits a great sin against God and is punished for it. And Achan's sin brings trouble not only on his own family, but on all the people of Israel, and many people die because of his sin. And so we studied that last week, and they named a whole valley after this incident. They called it the Valley of Achor. And Achor is the Hebrew word for trouble. So this valley became known for years and years as the Valley of Trouble. But then hundreds of years later, there was a prophet named Hosea, and Hosea was given a prophecy from God. And this is what God said through Hosea. He said, after talking about Israel, who again had turned their back on God, Hosea prophesied that God would come to the people again and turn them back to himself. And this is what God prophesied through Hosea. He says, therefore, behold, I will allure her. That is, God will allure Israel, his people, his bride. God often in the Old Testament is talked about like the groom, and his people, Israel, called like the bride, okay? And that carries on into the New Testament. Behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And there I will give her her vineyards and make the valley of Achor, the valley of trouble, a door of hope. And that is just such a perfect picture of who God is. Maybe you don't know God yet. Maybe you don't know him very well. But God is in the business of taking valleys of trouble and turning them into doors of hope. And he did that for Israel, and he does that for us today. This is true of so many of your stories. I've heard so many stories. It's a great privilege to get to hear so many stories of how God takes a season or a valley of trouble and turns it into a door of hope. That's my story. Many of you know my story, maybe some of you don't. About 18 years ago, my older sister Kim, she was 26 at the time, I was 24. She was tragically killed in a bicycling accident. She was hit by a passing semi-truck, killed instantly. And that entered a season of trouble and sorrow and darkness and confusion. It was a valley for me and my family. It was so disorienting. Everything was on the table. God, are you really who I thought you were? Are you really for us? Everything was on the table. It was a valley of trouble. But yet, God walked with me through that valley. He was there at every step. Sometimes I knew it, sometimes I didn't, but he was always with me through the whole valley. And that valley turned into a door of hope. A door that I never imagined was possible. At the time, I was working as an accountant. I never thought that I would be a pastor. But God opened this new door, and we're all sitting here today because of the door that God opened at the end of the valley. And he walked with me all the way through the valley to the door, and this new life, the life that has led to so many things, the meeting of my wife and my 2 boys and the starting of this church and so many things, so many relationships as I look out were started because of the valley of trouble and the door of hope at the end of it. And I think that's how God works. We see that working again and again in Scripture. Maybe you've heard the story of Joseph. This is a different Joseph than the Joseph of Arimathea that gave the tomb for Jesus' body, but he was named after this Joseph. And this Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Israel. Israel had 12 sons, and Joseph was the youngest. And it's pretty typical that the youngest son or the youngest child always gets the coolest clothes. I mean, that's how it works in my family. I mean, some of you know my little sister Kaylee, she got the coolest clothes, and that's always because mom and dad don't really make their money until the last is born. They're sort of struggling along, and then that last one gets all the nice clothes. And it's so true. It's right here in Genesis. And so Joseph has this really cool coat, and his brothers are jealous of him because he's also a dreamer. He's probably a pretty good musician or something too, and he had all the talent. And then the other brothers say, let's get rid of him because I think he's dad's favorite. And so they plan and scheme to kill him, and they throw him in a pit, and they see him down at that pit. I mean, it's just a brutal story. They see him there, and then they see coming in the distance, they see a band of slave traders. And they say, this is classic brother stuff, they say, what a waste of a good brother. Let's sell him instead of kill him. And so they think, well, same ends. He's going to be gone, right? And so they pull him out of the pit and they sell him to the slave traders, and Joseph is taken into slavery in Egypt. Now, years and years go on, and supernaturally God puts Joseph in these spaces and places where he actually becomes seen by the Pharaoh as a great counselor, and he becomes like the right-hand man to the Pharaoh of Egypt, the most powerful empire at the time. And he actually becomes sort of like overall, like the czar over the economy. And he plans this, he sees with God's help that there's a famine coming, and so he plans accordingly. And so a famine hits the whole region of the world, including where his brothers and his father and his family are up in Judea. And so the whole world ends up coming to Egypt to try to survive. And his brothers and his father and his whole family, they come as well, now beggars. And not knowing it, they're standing before the brother that they tried to kill. And Joseph ends up blessing them when they cursed him. And Joseph understands that valleys of trouble often lead to doors of hope. And so this is what Joseph says to his brothers when they finally realize it's him and they can't believe that he's forgiven them and he's blessing them. Joseph says this, Genesis 50, verse 20. He says, "As for you, brothers, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." So Joseph sees it that often the way God works is he uses a valley of trouble to bring about a door of hope. And then if you've been with us, we've been studying through Joshua, there's this amazing woman. You have to know about this woman. Her name is Rahab. And she is in the city of Jericho, which is the first city that the Israelites, when they come to take possession of the land, that's the first city that they are going to attack. And they send in spies. And Rahab is working as a prostitute and running a brothel in that town. So she's in a valley of trouble just like every day. Her whole life is a valley of trouble. This is not a safe place for her to be. And she's not an Israelite. She's a Canaanite. And so she's never heard about this God of Yahweh, but then some stories start trickling in about this God and what he's done in rescuing the people out of Egypt, and that they're coming, this people group is moving nearer and nearer to them. And she comes to hear these stories, and one day they send out spies, and spies show up at her brothel to hide, and she ends up choosing to trust in the God of Israel and help these spies, and in return, these spies promise to help her and her family when the raid begins. And as the story goes, the army of God, God's people of Israel, they surround the city, and miraculously the walls fall down except for the walls of Rahab's house, and her whole family are spared. I mean, Rahab is in a valley of trouble, right? Like, she is standing in the shadow of death, literally. Death is all around her, danger is all around her, and yet she stands firm in the promises of God given to her by these spies. And she didn't grow up. I mean, many of you might have not grown up in the church knowing about this God that we speak of and read of in this Bible. You're like Rahab. And with whatever information you have that opportunity to trust in this God who seems to take the valley of trouble and turn it into a door of hope. And Rahab's whole family is spared. And not just her family in that generation, but for generations to come. And we actually find out that Rahab is actually the great-great-great-great-grandmother of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Unbelievable that this valley of trouble becomes a door of hope. And God just does that over and over and over again. And then we get to the gospel of Jesus Christ, the story of Jesus. And this really is the story of God's ultimate plan for all creation. And this is his ultimate plan for the salvation of the world. And therefore, we should expect that it is also the ultimate example of turning a valley of trouble into a door of hope. And that's exactly what we find. This Jesus Christ, who, while he lived, attested to his nature through many miracles. He self-identified as the Son of God. He said, I am the Messiah. I'm the one that God has sent. He said, I am truly God in the flesh. And this Jesus didn't run from trouble. In fact, he ran straight towards trouble. He said, hey, I've come for trouble because I've come to give my life as a sacrifice for the many. So Jesus willingly and purposefully walked right into trouble to rescue you and me. Why would he do that? Because only he knew about this other door. He knew that the only way to that other door was to go through death. And then on the other side of death was the door of doors. The doors to life after death. So this kind of trouble is like no other trouble that anybody experienced. They almost died. Joseph almost died. Rahab almost died. King David almost died. Abraham almost died. I mean, eventually they did die, but they never came back from it. Only Jesus went into the trouble of death itself and walked out the other side. That's the door Jesus opened. He stepped into death so that he could open the final door of hope, the door that had yet been unlocked. That's the door of resurrection. That's why we are here today. We would not be here if he had not unlocked that door. Jesus had to die on the cross to take the trouble of the world onto himself. Jesus had to die so that he could satisfy the debt that our sin had accumulated. Jesus had to die so that the justice of God's character could be upheld. Jesus had to die to show that God's justice is not incongruent with God's love. Jesus died to prove that there is not a valley of trouble that is too long or too dark or too impassable that God cannot walk with you through it, including the valley of death. So he walked through that valley of the shadow of death for you, so that he can walk through the valley of any trouble with you. Now you can know that he will never leave you. He will never forsake you. Nothing can separate you from the love of God because he opened this door. And that's why it's the most famous door in the history of the world. The door of the empty tomb. Because Jesus, God in the flesh, proved that there is hope even beyond the grave. So we celebrate. Now, perhaps you're wondering, okay, well, that sounds great and all, but how do I gain access to that door of hope? How do I come to experience this door that Jesus unlocked 2,000 years ago? It's a great question. It's a very important question. Because the key is not like any other key that you've ever encountered, okay? So the key to experiencing this door is not moral living. It's not just doing more good than bad. This key is not religion. It is not just following rules as closely as possible. And this key is not sort of the secular creed of do no harm. None of those are the key. Instead, Jesus explains that he is not only the one who unlocked the door, but he is in fact the door itself. He's the key. It seems like everything's about this Jesus. Yeah, that's it. The universe is meant to revolve around this Jesus because he is God in the flesh. And he is the only thing with enough weight and glory to keep all the planets aligned without spinning out into chaos. Yeah, it's all about him. That's the point. He unlocks the door. He is the key. It's about him. And when you walk through it, you get to know him. You say, how would I know this? Well, Jesus tells us this. Let's read together John 10, 1 to 11. We'll throw it up on the screen here for you, and you can follow along as I read. Jesus says this. Before his death, before his resurrection, he says this. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold, he's telling a parable, by the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, the stranger, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Now, John inserts a little narrator comment. He says, this is a figure of speech that Jesus used with them, with the people. But they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus said it again to them. And I just love that. I mean, maybe you have been to many Easter services, and it's just never clicked. You're in good company. When Jesus was standing before these people, they couldn't quite understand it. So Jesus says it again. And look how he gets a little personal. He says it again. Okay. Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Pasture equals life to sheep. The thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. It's going to be a nice pasture. He says, I am the good shepherd. The shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. So Jesus is the door. He makes it very clear. There is a door. I am the door. And to find this resurrection life, this pasture that he speaks of, you must go through him. There's no other way. You cannot atone for your own sin. You cannot live a good enough life. You must go through the door, through his sacrifice, through his resurrection, with his Spirit. That's the only way. You must follow him. You must learn to hear his voice. What does his voice sound like? You have to spend time with him to learn his voice. And then you must trust him with your whole life. He's the door. Well, this seems sort of limiting, Dave. Yeah. It is sort of limiting. Which reminds me of another famous door. Now, I apologize if you don't know about this movie. I just assume that we have so many sort of computer engineers at our church. I just assume all of you got into it because of this movie. Maybe not. Maybe you're in it for the money. But let me show you this other door, okay? Anybody recognize that door? The Matrix, okay. And show them the next one just in case you don't know how the Matrix works. There's how the Matrix is. So there's doors everywhere. Go ahead, take that down. Just take that whole screen down. I don't want you to look at that too much. Okay. Make you go crazy. So many doors. Which one do I choose, right? This is the common feeling of human beings. Well, there's so many doors. How could I know that that one door is the door? If I choose that door, then I can't try all these other doors. I don't have enough data to make the decision, right? Which door do I choose? Don't you feel like that sometimes? There's so many doors. How can I just pick one? I need to dabble in all the doors. I need to figure out which door brings me the most life. We all feel this. The only problem with this is that that's not how faith works. Faith means that you make a decision before you've tried every other door. But don't worry, it's not blind faith. Because if you're like me, you've tried some other doors, right? Maybe you've tried the door of religious effort. Maybe you've tried the door of moral excellence. Maybe you've tried the door of ecstasy and pleasure. You have evidence. Well, you say, but I don't have all the evidence. I've only tried a couple doors. Okay? But there are people who have tried the other doors that you haven't tried. That's also evidence. You say, how do I know? Well, remember the song we started with, The Doors? Actually, that band is named after a famous book by Aldous Huxley called The Doors of Perception, which is a book about finding another level of sort of enlightenment or humanity through the use of psychedelic drugs. That's who the Doors took their name of. They're one of the classic LSD bands. The problem is, Jim Morrison's not exactly a shining endorsement for the hope of psychedelic drugs. He died at the age of 27. Kind of mysteriously, we don't know exactly why. But we have evidence that psychedelic drugs don't tend to lead to life and life abundant. Maybe for a moment. People are still trying it. My point is this. You've tried some doors. Some other people have tried some doors. At some point, you make a decision, an act of faith. You can't try every door. Jim Carrey, the actor Jim Carrey, famously said, I think everyone should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer. Well, the problem is most of you won't ever get rich and famous. Sorry. So that door could potentially always keep you from taking the door that Jesus opened. So you kind of have to take Jim Carrey's word for it, I guess, is what I'm saying. So many doors. But really, are they all so different? I don't think so. And this is why this picture from The Matrix is actually a better picture. Anybody know that scene? This is Neo with the architect. And in this scene, you can only see one door, but there's actually another door. There's actually two doors. And the architect says you have to pick one of the two. And I actually think that's actually more what real life is like. Even though there are many doors, they are really all attached to one of two houses. And I came up with this analogy before I realized that the Doors, the band, didn't write this song. I thought they had written the song, The House of the Rising Sun. Do you know the song? It's the Animals. And I found that out and I said, dang, I can't use that analogy or illustration. And then I said, yes, I can. Why? But I had to tell you about it. Okay, so the Doors didn't write it. In fact, the Animals didn't write it either. They actually think it was like an centuries old, like Irish ballad that got passed down. And anyhow, it was in the Appalachian Mountains for a while. Then somebody picked it up and made a song. You know the song? There is a house in New Orleans. They call it the Rising Sun. It's been the ruin of many a poor boy. And God, I know I'm one. I'm pointing at Tylene because I'm always auditioning for the band, like all the time. I was pretty good. That was better than the first service. Yeah, okay. Wow, I hit it. Yeah, just make a note of that. Thank you. Okay. You know that song? Okay, so that song, I said, that's a good song. And the song's kind of vague. You don't really know what this house of the rising sun is. And I think it's meant to be that way because I think there's many doors that lead into the same house. So what does this lead to? This door could be a door to a bar. What is a bar? It's where the prospects of forgetting your pain can be found. Maybe it's a brothel where the prospects of pleasure can be found. Well, maybe it's a casino where the prospect of riches and financial security can be found. But you see, it doesn't really matter because all of those things are one kind of house of the rising sun. Eventually, they run out. Eventually, you sober up. Eventually, you realize, like Jim Carrey, that the money doesn't satisfy. Eventually, you realize that pleasure is like chasing your tail. But there is a second kind of house, and it's also called the house of the rising sun. S-O-N. See what I did there? The house of the rising sun. This is the house built upon the reality of the resurrection of the God-man Jesus Christ. That when he rose from the grave, he opened this new door that leads to this new kind of life on the other side. This is a life that never leaves you wanting. This is eternal life. And eternal life doesn't just start when you die, it starts right now. So what is this house of the rising sun, S-O-N? What is this place like? Well, this is a place where peace is not fleeting, where FOMO has no face because life has endlessness to it, and there is no anxiety for missing out on an adventure. This is a place where death doesn't stalk us like a lion, where fear of failure is replaced by the assurance of grace, where our sin never defines us, but God's forgiveness does, where weakness is not a pitiful misfortune, but an opportunity for God's glory to be displayed, where the name written on your forehead, or you could say on the front of the jersey, is more important than the name on the back of your jersey, which is to say that the family that you were born into isn't the family that you necessarily leave the party with. This is where the streets have no names. As Bono of the band U2 famously wrote. Do you know the story of that song? I won't sing it. Where the streets have no name? You're welcome. Where the streets have no name. Now, Bono grew up in Northern Ireland, where there was constantly battling Protestants and Catholics. There's a war of religion. And Bono took a trip to Ethiopia, and he saw two very different things. In Northern Ireland, he said, you could tell what somebody's religion was, whether they're Protestant or Catholic, whether they were rich or poor, by the name of the street they grew up on. You just had to say, hey, what street did you grow up on? And you would know. And it created division. He went to Ethiopia. He said, the streets don't even have names. And people live together. He said, that's what I want. How do I get that place? Well, Jesus had an answer for that. That's the door he opened, a place where the street has no name, which is to say that there is no division based on race, ethnicity, nationality, language. It's all the world together in the worship of one King, King Jesus. You say, how do I know that? Well, Jesus told us that this is what he's coming to do. In Luke 13, Jesus said this, or Luke wrote this: Jesus went through one town and village after another, teaching and making his way to Jerusalem. Someone asked him, Lord, are only a few going to be saved? Jesus said to them, make every effort to enter through the narrow door. Because I tell you, many will try to enter and won't be able to once the homeowner gets up and shuts the door. Then you will stand outside and knock on the door saying, Lord, open up for us. He will answer you, I don't know you or where you're from. Then you will say, we ate, we drank in your presence and taught in our streets. Our streets. Here's what Jesus is saying. He's talking to the religious Israelite who thinks because of the street that they live on, they're in with God. See, we grew up on your streets, God, so we're good. Jesus says, not so fast. But he will say, I tell you, I don't know you or where you're from. Get away from me, all you evildoers. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth in that place. When you see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that's Israel, and all of the prophets in the kingdom of God, but you yourselves thrown out, that's a bad place. He says they, and he's talking about the Gentiles, the non-Jews, those who didn't grow up on the best streets. He said they will come from east and west and north and south to share in the banquet in the kingdom of God. He says, note this, some who are last will be first, and some who are first will be last. That's the promise that the door opened. The door is now open to all people. And I think it's a warning to, maybe some of you grew up in the church. Maybe it's pretty natural for you to come to Easter. Maybe you come on Christmas, maybe you come every once in a while. This is a warning, I think, to those of us, and myself included, who grew up knowing about God. I say, I grew up on a street that talked about God. Jesus says, no, you have to still walk through the door. You still have to trust in me. You have to put away all that pretense. You have to put away all that entitlement. You have to put away all of that privilege. Now, if you use it for good, it's good. But if you use it for yourself, it's evil. He says, I'm creating a place where the streets have no name. So let's bring it back to that big idea. This new door opens up a world where borders and upbringing are no longer destination markers. For some were born on Last Avenue, they will one day be living on First Street. This new door of hope opened up by the resurrection makes this promise true hope. And it's true hope because it's not based on crossed fingers. It's not based on, I sure do hope so. It's based upon the rock-solid evidence of the historical event of the resurrection of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. So we don't just have to imagine that it's true. We can know it's true because it happened, and we can touch it and feel it. It's like a living hope. Just like doubting Thomas, he said, I got to touch it, I got to feel it. And he touched the holes in Jesus' wrists where the nails had pierced. It really is you, Thomas said. This is not just the imagination. This is living, breathing, blood-flowing life that has come through the door. And I guess that's why I'm excited to be here. Why I'm excited to get to do what I do. Just like this week, we remodeled this entrance. This building was built in 1910. It's our first 9 months in here, but there has been a lot of preaching of the good news of Jesus Christ here. And so we said, let's redo this entrance. Well, why would we do that? We got a good door over here. I said, I want as many doors as possible to this house. And we've been working very hard to keep the doors of the local church open in a city like Seattle. And it's not easy. Seattle, we've got a lot of going for us, but one of the things we don't have is lots of churches. We are the least church city in America. We just beat out San Francisco this year. Congratulations. We got them. Okay. But that's okay. But we fight to keep the doors open, not because the church is the door of hope, but it is a door, lowercase d, a lowercase door that leads people into an exploration, a consideration of the door, capital D, which is Jesus Christ himself. So we fight to keep these doors open. We remodel this. Check out this door if you haven't seen it yet. To make that door appealing that people might come and hear about this Jesus who brings real, true hope. Hope for life after any valley of trouble, even death itself. That's what we're doing. Now, I've found it to be true that if you frequent these doors, lowercase d, these doors of the local church, a church that preaches the Bible, that teaches the gospel, if you frequent these doors, and you got to come often, what will actually happen is that you will come to know, yes, about the door, but more importantly, you will come to know of the door. What's the difference? Okay, so about the door is like head knowledge. But if you come in these doors, you'll experience the worshiping community of God. And you can't get that just by reading books or doing something online. It's when you come with the people of God that you get to know the heart of God. That's heart knowledge. That when you come in these lowercase d's, you might just learn of the uppercase D door that is Jesus Christ, who is the resurrection. And what you might realize is that actually there's somebody knocking, and they've been knocking for a long time. And that knocking is not on the door of the head, but it's actually on the door of the heart. It's a tender knock, a loving knock, and it's coming from the door himself, the resurrection himself. It's coming from Jesus himself. And he knocks because he never forces you into his house, and he never forces himself into your house. God has given you a real will and a real choice and the autonomy over your own heart. This is your door. You can let in or out whoever you want. And the resurrection comes to you, and he patiently waits, and he knocks. He says, I've got a gift to give you of new life in my spirit, new life in the power of the resurrection, and I want to give it to you, but I won't break the wall down. You got to open it for me. And Jesus actually tells us this in a revelation given to one of his disciples, John. You can read about this in Revelation chapter 3, verse 20. It says this, Jesus speaking, see, I stand at the door and knock. This is the door that you control of your heart. And knock. And anyone who hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me. That's the invitation. And God is making you aware of that invitation this morning. He's telling you there is a new door. You didn't even know about it, but it's there that can take you past death and past the fear of death. He's telling you there's a new hope, that your sin is not big enough to enslave you forever. And he's telling you have a new choice, to open the door of your heart to this death-defeating, serpent-crushing, forgiveness-granting, life-giving person who took the name Jesus 2,000 years ago and has been knocking at your heart ever since. But it's up to you. Are you ready to stop trying out every other door and consider this Jesus, this door of hope, and open yourself up to the possibility that resurrection life is possible. I pray that today, maybe today, you'll experience just a crack in the door filled with light. So you see, sometimes you don't open it all the way, but you just crack it open and you experience just a little bit of light coming through that crack. And then I pray if you experience that this morning, that maybe you'll come back next week or the week after and you'll open that door a little bit more. And you start to experience the light and life available to you because of the door that Jesus Christ unlocked 2,000 years ago. Let's pray.